Hello and welcome. This is your instructor, Dennis Westman, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about Excel Tutorial 3. As we have done in past, I'd like you to go ahead and grab your textbook and follow along and highlight certain things as I talk about them. And as usual, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the lab questions area in the Blackboard discussion area. Okay, so let's look at Excel Tutorial 3, and this begins on page 115. Now, Excel Tutorial 3 is all about creating formulas and working with functions. And so there's a couple of key concepts that are really going to need to be understood by you with regards to creating formulas. And I'll talk about those and highlight those in just a little bit. So again, on page 115 begins a chapter. 116 and 117 talk a little bit about a visual overview of how to create those various items, and then the different parts of an Excel screen that talk a little bit about the functions and the formatting. Now look at page 118, and this is a section that's called Understanding Cell References. And if you look at the little sort of maroon box that's called References, it talks a little bit about entering relative, absolute, and mixed references. And this is one of those areas where you're going to have to really understand the differences between relative, absolute, and mixed references for cell references. So a relative reference is simply typing in the cell reference like B2. That you would go to column B in row 2, and that would be the cell reference. So you're looking at B2. But occasionally you need to create an absolute cell reference. And this is oftentimes the case whenever you're creating a particular formula, and you always want to use a certain value or a certain cell in that formula, and it needs to stay the same, but the other part of the formula can change. And so that's when you would use an absolute cell reference. That part of the formula that doesn't need to change is called an absolute cell reference. And the way you do that is by putting dollar symbols in front of the cell reference, in front of the column reference, and in front of the row reference. And so whenever you want to calculate something, and let's say you want to change the calculations based on a particular month. You know, you have like maybe January, February, March, April, May, but you're always going to use the same dollar amount up here. Then whenever you're performing the calculations, you use the exact same cell reference, an absolute cell reference, to reference this amount up here that doesn't change, but a relative cell reference for this area that does change. So relative changes relative to the particular area in the worksheet that you're working in. An absolute cell reference does not change. It stays the same. And then as a kind of a third type of reference, you have a mixed reference, where you could have a relative column reference, but an absolute row reference. So you would use the dollar sign for the absolute portion, but you would not use any kind of additional symbol for the relative reference portion. So a relative reference doesn't have any dollar signs preceding the references, can be copied and pasted, and will adjust and change as you copy and paste things down or to the left or to the right or that sort of thing. An absolute cell reference stays the same. It absolutely references the same cell every time. So if you're referencing A50 and you're using an absolute cell reference for the A and the 50 portion, it never changes. The absolute reference is it locks it into place. And then the mixed reference is a combination of the relative cell reference and the absolute cell reference. And I would definitely encourage you to read the chapter to better understand those. And you'll definitely want to check out the help if you have any questions about absolute and relative. And also check out that information I gave you in the discussion board dealing with the Microsoft website, because you're going to find some helpful information about using absolute and relative cell references. And if all else fails, just Google how do I use absolute cell references, and you're going to get up some nice YouTube videos from other folks that talk about how to use those types of cell references. So absolute, relative, and mixed, very important. I can't stress enough to you how important that's going to be, not only for this week, but throughout the rest of the class. In test taking, during test taking time, absolutely very, very important. Relative, absolute, and mixed references in cells. Now, as we're moving along, page 120, 121 talks about the different types of references and how to incorporate those into formulas and functions. Page 124, 125, 125 talks about the mixed references. And then if you look at page 126 at the bottom, there's a little blue box called Insight, and it's understanding when to use relative, absolute, and mixed references. Please read this. Please pay careful attention to this because this will give you some additional information to help you better understand when to use relative, absolute, and mixed references. Now, if you look at the bottom page 127, this is a section called Working with Functions, and a function is just simply a type of command that helps you to quickly calculate or perform some sort of calculation, like a total, average, minimum, maximum, those kinds of things. It's just a pre-programmed type of Excel feature so that you don't have to manually type in, like for instance, instead of adding together a bunch of cells, A1 plus A2 plus A3 plus A4 plus A5, you can just say, use the sum function and just sum everything from A1 to A5. You don't have to type in all the plus signs and all the A1, A2, A3, A4, and those sort of things. It just makes it a lot easier. So a function just allows you to create spreadsheets and then the formulas within those spreadsheets in a much quicker manner. And if you look, you'll see there's different types of function categories on page 128. They're going to talk about them. We're going to go through most of those throughout the course, but you're not going to be required to know everything about every single function because there are hundreds and hundreds. I believe there's even over 1,000 different functions that can be used. So we're not going to have to know all of those, but you're going to definitely need to know some of the common ones like average, minimum, maximum, those kinds of things. Sum is another one. Continuing on, it just talks a little bit more about the functions and how to use those on page 130, 131, 132, 133. Those pages are really talking about using the average function. So definitely see that. And then on page 134, you can choose the functions from a list, or as in page 134, you can actually type the function and it's going to try to guess based on what you're typing which function you might want to use. So that's kind of nice. It's a nice little way to quickly get to the functions. And you know, for this chapter, I might recommend you looking at page 137 and doing the quick check just kind of on your own. It's not for grades or anything like that, but you might take a look at that, and that will help you to make sure that you understand what's going on in chapter 3, tutorial 3. Now page 138 and 139 begins the second section of tutorial 3, and this text section talks a little bit more about formulas and functions, and then something called autofill. Look on page 140. Autofill should be your best friend. This is a fantastic little feature in Microsoft Excel, autofill. And essentially what autofill does is it automatically fills a row or a column's worth of data without having to manually type all that in. So it automatically fills and copies and pastes formulas, functions. It does contiguous type of items, like if you want to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you only type Monday and Tuesday, if you use the autofill and move it across, it fills in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so you don't have to type it. Very, very handy. I would definitely encourage you to read that. Autofill is very, very powerful. Again, not just numbers, but sequence of items. Very, very, very powerful. And that's talked about on page 140, 141, 42, 43, and I believe it continues on for multiple pages. Days of the week, those are discussed, actually it's the months on page 145, being able to automatically fill using the autofill handle to complete the months. Okay, and then page 147 begins working on some additional items in the Excel chapter, working with functions. That's discussed on page 151, using if, then, and greater than and less than. You'll get a brief introduction to doing that. And so that begins on page 151. And again, that's where you get in a little bit more complicated formulas, but it's very powerful to be able to use the if-then statements, or if something is less than or greater than or equal to a certain value. Provides you a great way to do some really neat formulas. Then on page 155, it talks about using date functions, and this allows you to insert the date and time, the time only, those kinds of things within your worksheet. So instead of having to manually type in the date or a particular item, using one of the date and time functions, you can automatically populate a cell with that information, and it updates automatically for you. So that's really, really nice. And then there's some financial functions that are discussed on page 156 and 157. These items we're going to get into a little bit more in subsequent chapters, but briefly read over those, kind of understand the principal, interest, the figuring out the different types of payments and those kinds of things using some of the basic functions. Like I said, we're gonna go into a little bit more detail on those later in the chapter and in the course. But it's a great way to quickly create a worksheet that helps you calculate a payment or something like that. And that continues on for multiple pages, ending on page 162, where we finish up the chapter. And kind of like with the section 1, I'd recommend that you take a look at the section 2 quick check, which is on the middle of the page on page 162. Again, not to be turned in, just something for you to do on your own to help make sure that you understand the chapter. So as usual, if you have any questions or need any assistance, please feel free to post to the lab questions area, and I'll respond, or your fellow classmates will respond. And you're always welcome to contact me directly, but like I said, it's really best if you post the general lab questions to that area. That way I can answer them, and other students who may have those questions can also see my answer as well. So I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you virtually again. Thanks.